Welcome to TB Dahl Audiobooks. Before the story begins, please take a quick second to subscribe and leave a comment below. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, enjoy the listen. This is an audiobook. Chapter 2, Part 2. Undisclosed Background. Author, TB Dahl. Chapter 2, The Meeting. Chapter 2, The Meeting. The rear car park was empty, except for two vehicles left against the far wall, both dark, both still. Rain had reduced to a fine mist that caught the light from the single overhead lamp mounted above the loading dock. The rest of the car park sat in shadow. Riley came in from the street side, staying close to the building's stone flank. She moved slowly, reading the space before committing to it. A delivery area to her left, sealed, a row of recycling containers lined against the wall ahead. The loading dock's roller shutter was down and padlocked. She counted two security cameras, one at the near corner, pointing toward the car park entrance, one above the loading dock, angled at the shutter. The far corner of the car park was where the letter said. She found the service door without difficulty. Steel frame, painted the same institutional grey as the concrete utility housing beside it. A keypad mounted at shoulder height, plastic buttons, slightly worn. No signage. No window, nothing to suggest what was beyond it except the absence of everything. Riley stood in front of it and didn't move. She had left Tim Wendelboe that morning with Tara's voice in her ear. "It's a setup, Rix, don't be stupid." And she had spent the hours between rationalizing the decision to come here. She had researched. She had changed her clothes. She had taken the long way through Aker Brygge, pausing twice to check reflections in shop windows, waiting once at the edge of a footbridge long enough to see if anyone adjusted their pace to match hers. She was alone, as far as she could determine. She pulled out her phone. At the door, code in hand, going in. Museum rear car park, basement entrance, far corner. She sent it to Tara, then waited 10 seconds to confirm the message delivered. The keypad was cold under her fingers. 5, 6, 7, 8, hash. The lock released with a clean mechanical click. Inside, the service entry was a transitional space, the kind of room designed purely to separate one world from another. A bench along one wall, metal lockers above it, coat hooks, a shelf stacked with cleaning supplies, two pairs of rubber boots in different sizes. The floor was concrete, slightly gritty underfoot. A single fluorescent tube overhead gave the room a brightness that had nothing to do with warmth. The smell was specific: concrete dust, old fabric, ventilation machinery running somewhere below. Riley let the exterior door fall shut behind her and stood still. The noise of Oslo disappeared. The mist, the distant traffic, the faint sound of the waterfront, all of it cut off by the steel door and the weight of the building above. The basement of a national museum at 21:30 on a Wednesday was a particular kind of quiet. Not peaceful, institutional. The quiet of a space that existed to support something rather than to be experienced itself. An inner door led deeper in, closed, no light underneath it. The exterior door opened. Riley moved before she thought, placing herself to the left of the inner door, where the angle from the entrance would show her someone's profile before they saw her face. She pressed her back against the wall of lockers and watched. A man stepped in, dark jacket, dark trousers, work boots. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and he moved through the door with the particular quality of someone who had already mapped the room before entering it. His eyes went to the corners first, then the ceiling, then the inner door, then, finally, to her. Neither of them spoke. He was a few years from 30, she guessed, dark blonde hair, damp from the mist, the kind of face that was difficult to read because the default expression was neutral rather than guarded. His hands were relaxed at his sides. He hadn't flinched when he saw her, but he'd stopped moving, which was its own kind of caution. "Are you HR?" Riley asked. "No." His voice was low, even, Norwegian accent under English, like hers. "Are you?" "No." He looked at the exterior door behind him, then back at her. "You have a letter." It wasn't a question. Same time, same place, same code. Riley studied him. "Yours said not to bring anyone." "As did yours, I assume." He glanced at the inner door. "How long have you been inside?" 2 minutes? She pushed away from the lockers. Mine had a mark in the envelope flap, R-17. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, more like confirmation of a suspicion he hadn't fully formed yet. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a plain cream envelope, opened it, and angled the flap toward the light. A small printed mark, barely visible. He held it up so she could see. E-17. Riley looked at it, then at him. Same number, she said. Different letter. He folded the envelope and put it back in his pocket. I'm Elliot Harper. Riley Hunt. The names produced nothing. She watched his face for recognition and found none. He watched hers with the same attention and found the same result. You don't know me, she said. I don't know you. Someone wanted both of us here at the same time. Yes. Elliot moved to the inner door and checked that it wasn't locked. It opened inward. Beyond it, darkness and the faint mechanical sound of ventilation. He let it fall back to its frame without latching. How did your letter arrive? Cafe in Grünerløkka this morning. Tim Vendelbo on Torvald Meyer's gate. A man, grey-haired, late 50s, didn't speak, didn't wait for a response, handed me the envelope and left. Mine came to a construction site in Bjørvika. The man bypassed site security. Dark coat, didn't identify himself. Elliot's eyes moved across the room again, unhurried but thorough. He shouldn't have been able to get onto that site without clearance. Riley had thought the same thing about the cafe. She and Tara had been at their usual table, at their usual time, on a Tuesday morning. Not scheduled publicly anywhere, not announced. The man had walked directly to her, not to the counter, not to the window table where someone might browse before approaching. He'd located her specifically. Neither courier stayed long enough to be questioned, she said. Both knew exactly where we'd be. Which means someone has been tracking our routines. She said it plainly, because saying it plainly was better than letting it sit at the edge of thought. We were both reached in controlled environments during predictable hours, public enough that nothing could happen to us there, private enough that the exchange wouldn't be noticed. Elliot looked at her with something that might have been reassessment. What do you do? Geopolitical advisory, political risk. She registered the slight change in his posture, the minor recalibration. You? Construction engineer, site manager. She glanced at his hands without meaning to. The knuckles were roughened, a small white scar across one knuckle. The letter told you not to contact police. It told you the same thing. He wasn't asking. I'm aware of what it said. She looked at the inner door. We're standing in the basement of a national museum because two strangers handed us coded letters and told us to come here, and neither of us went to the police, so whatever our reasons, we made the same decision. My reason was that going to the police with no evidence and no information would achieve nothing. What was yours? That whoever sent this already knows enough about my life that ignoring it felt more dangerous than responding to it. She paused. Also, the mark in the flap, R17 and E17. The same number, formatted the same way. That's not a threat. It's a filing system. Elliot was quiet for a moment. He looked at the inner door, then at the exterior door, then at her. I'm going to wedge this shut, he said, moving to the exterior door and using the rubber stopper from under the lockers to hold it 2 centimeters from the frame. Not locked from outside, not sealed. We look. If it's empty, we leave. If it isn't, we decide then. Agreed. He tested the weight of the inner door, pushing it fully open and holding it for a moment before stepping through. The corridor beyond was narrow and smelled of old concrete and cool air. Pipes ran the length of the ceiling. Water, ventilation, something electrical in a plastic conduit. The fluorescent lights along the ceiling were older than the ones in the service entry, their output yellower and slightly uneven. One at the far end flickered once and held. 4 doors off the corridor. 2 on the left, 1 on the right, 1 at the far end. The far end door stood partially open. Through the gap, a thin line of light. Elliot moved ahead of her, staying close to the right-hand wall, his footsteps quiet on the concrete. Riley followed, keeping slightly behind his left shoulder so she could see past him without being in his direct path. She noted the other doors as she passed. The first two on the left were labelled in small plastic signs, Teknisk Rom and Lager B. The door on the right had no label. All three were closed. The far door had a square of frosted glass set into it at head height. The light from inside was warm, not fluorescent, incandescent, or something close to it. A desk lamp, maybe, or a standing lamp rather than overhead lighting. Elliot stopped 2 meters from the door and listened. No voices, no movement, no breath. He looked back at Riley. She tilted her head toward the door. He reached out and pushed it open slowly. The room was small and functional, a staff break room or a meeting room pressed into dual service, a table with 4 chairs, a kitchenette along one wall with a small sink and a coffee maker that hadn't been used recently, a notice board covered with laminated schedules and a few postcards, a window that was below ground level and looked out onto a concrete light well. A standing lamp in the corner provided the warm light visible from the corridor. Its shade was slightly tilted. Papers on the table, scattered, not placed. A ceramic mug, empty, its rim turned toward the door. Riley's eye moved across all of it and then stopped. A shoe. Dark leather, well made, the sole facing upward, visible just beyond the far edge of the table. She didn't move forward. She looked at Elliot. He'd already seen it. He moved around the left side of the table in 3 measured steps and crouched. The man on the floor was in his late 60s, grey hair, thin through the temples. A dark raincoat over a formal dark suit, not museum issue, not workwear. His face was pale and composed in the specific way a face becomes composed when there is no longer any reason for expression. His hands were at his sides. His eyes were closed. Elliot pressed 2 fingers to the side of the man's neck and held them there for 5 seconds. Dead. He stood, looked at the man's position, looked at the floor around him, looked at the walls. No blood visible, nothing overturned. Riley remained in the doorway. Her pulse was high, but her thinking was sharp. Sharper, actually, than it had been in the car park. Danger did that sometimes. It narrowed everything down. She looked at the man's face. The grey hair, the build, the dark coat. It could have been him, the man from the cafe. She had seen him for less than 30 seconds, in a busy room with half her attention on Tara's expression. She had the impression of grey hair, dark clothing, a deliberate walk. This man was grey-haired, formally dressed, dead. She couldn't be certain. She wasn't going to say it until she was. "He's been here a while," Elliot said. He hadn't touched the body beyond checking the pulse. He was looking at the man's hands now. Look. Near the man's right hand, not in it but close enough that it might have slipped from his fingers, was a folded piece of paper. White, standard weight, folded once. No envelope. Riley stepped into the room and crouched beside Elliot, reading the note without touching it. 3 lines of typed text. Trust no one. They know about the meeting. File 17 is open. She read it twice. The paper was clean, no smudging visible, but the folds were not sharp. The kind of softness that came from paper that had been handled, carried, and unfolded and refolded before being left here. Elliot had already moved to the table. He pointed at a second scrap, smaller, torn from something larger, written in ink rather than typed. 17/Northern Table /B-4/Brasovo. 4 fragments separated by forward slashes, like a reference, like someone disassembling a file path into shorthand. The number connected them both. Riley said it before Elliot could. R-17, E-17, file 17. And now Brasovo. He looked at her. You know what that is? Brasovo was the estate of Grand Duke Michael Alexandrovich, last male Romanov in the direct imperial line before the revolution. She said it the way she said things when she was thinking out loud, quickly, without space for him to interrupt. He was Nicholas II's younger brother. Nicholas abdicated in his favour in 1917. Michael refused to take power without a constituent assembly's approval. He was murdered by Bolsheviks in Perm in 1918. She paused. This note is referring to a specific file, number 17, associated with the Northern Table, which might be a geographic designation. Scandinavian possibly, and B-4 is probably a sub-reference, an archive slot, a shelf number, a location code. Elliot was looking at her with the particular quality of someone who had stopped cataloguing physical threats and started cataloguing information. It was a different kind of attention. She could feel it. "You know Russian imperial history," he said. "I know European political history. It's my job." "Then you'd know whether the Romanov line is relevant to anything happening now." "It's always relevant to something," she stood. "But file 17 specific to Brasovo, connected to a note left beside a dead man in a Norwegian museum basement, suggests it's relevant to something operational rather than academic." Elliot looked down at the body. His jaw was set. "We were summoned to this room," he said. "The letter gave us an access code, a time and a location. We're standing over a dead man with our fingerprints on the door handle and whatever the cameras picked up of our faces in the car park." Riley had already followed that thought to its end. She didn't need him to finish it. "We look like we're here." "We are here." "We look like we were involved." "Unless someone verifies the letters," he looked up, "which the police would do, which gives us a starting point." "Or which implicates us further, depending on what HR is and who the police talk to afterward." She hadn't decided yet. She was turning the problem over, looking at its surfaces, the way she did when a briefing had too many moving parts and she needed to find the load-bearing element. "What's the risk of leaving?" "High." Elliot's voice was flat, not cold, clinical. "If this man is on the museum's payroll, someone will find him during the morning shift. They'll review the camera footage. The car park camera was facing the entrance, not the service door. I checked before I came in, but the exterior may have caught us arriving. And if someone inside the building knows about this room, they may already know we were here." He looked at the corridor, then back at her. "The wedge I put in the exterior door. If someone comes through the car park in the next 20 minutes, they'll know the door was propped." Riley looked at the dead man, at the note, at the scrap on the table with its fragmented reference to a file that apparently connected to both of them through markings they hadn't understood until this moment. "He tried to warn someone," she said. "Whoever left this note, or whoever he was when he was alive, he tried to warn someone about the meeting being compromised. They know about the meeting. File 17 is open. That's not a threat. That's an alarm." "Written for who?" "For us, possibly." She straightened. "Or for whoever was supposed to be in this room with him when we arrived." A silence passed between them. The standing lamp held its warm, slightly tilted light. The ventilation hummed somewhere below the floor. The man on the concrete was very still. "I'm calling 112, Riley said. "Wait! We are standing over a dead body inside a national institution. A man is dead." She kept her voice level. "I know what the letter said. I know what you're thinking. But the legal exposure of leaving this room without reporting it is worse than anything the police can do to us in the next hour." The sound came from somewhere to the left, not the ventilation. Riley knew the ventilation by now. A low mechanical exhalation that moved through the walls at even intervals, predictable enough to ignore. This was different. A scrape, brief and soft, followed by nothing. Elliot was at the doorway before she registered that he had moved. He pressed himself against the right side of the frame and held his arm out at an angle, a flat, instinctive gesture that she understood without needing to be told. "Stay. Be quiet." She stayed. The break room held its silence around her. The dead man on the floor, the table with its typed note, the small yellow circle of the tilted lamp, her own breathing, which she was managing with deliberate care, drawing air in slowly through the nose and releasing it before it could develop into anything audible. Elliot listened for 40 seconds. She counted. The corridor gave back nothing. No footstep, no shift in the air. Only the pipes, the fluorescent light 2 rooms away that had been cycling between bright and dim since they arrived, and the faint residue of the sound that might have been a person or might have been the building settling into the cold. He stepped back from the doorway, but kept his body angled toward the corridor. "Service area goes deeper," he said, barely above a murmur. "There may be another access point." Another exit? Or another entrance? She held his gaze. Could still be the building. Yes. Neither of them believed it with confidence, and they both knew it. Riley looked at the man on the floor. Grey-haired, dark raincoat, formally dressed beneath it, face slack and turned slightly to the left, as if he had begun to look toward the door and changed his mind at the wrong moment. He had walked into Tim Wendelboe that morning with the envelope and handed it to her and left without a word. And now he was here, and the gap between those two events contained something she didn't have the pieces to fill. The scraping sound did not come again. After another minute, Elliot moved back from the door. Not fully, not casually. He simply repositioned himself so he could see both the corridor and the room, his back against the wall beside the frame rather than in front of it. Tell me exactly what you're going to say, he said. She had already been thinking it through. The truth, or enough of it. I received a letter this morning, hand-delivered by an unknown man at a cafe on Grünerløkka. The letter was unsigned except for the initials HR. It gave me this location, this time, and the entry code. It told me not to contact police and not to bring anyone. I came anyway. I entered using the code, and I found a man already dead. She paused. Then I met you. In what order did we enter? I was inside first. You came in behind me. That matches what happened. The police will ask why two separate people received letters with the same access code and the same meeting time. Because someone wanted us here at the same time. He said it without inflection. We tell them that. We don't know why. Which is true. Which is true. She shifted her weight. They'll also want to know what the letters say in full. We give them the letters. He glanced briefly at her coat pocket, where the envelope had been since she arrived. There's no reason not to. The letters are the explanation for why we're here, and the explanation is legitimate. They'll see the marking inside the flap. R-17, E-17. Let them see it. We don't know what it means yet. His eyes moved back to the corridor, then to the note on the table. That's true as of tonight. Riley followed his gaze to the handwritten scrap. 17/Northern Table/B-4/Brasovo. The typed note beside it. Trust no one. They know about the meeting. File 17 is open. File 17. The same number inside the flap of the envelopes. She had been circling this since they found the note. The R and E in front of the number. She had been thinking of them as a filing system, a reference code within some archive. But the longer she stood in this room with a dead man and the number repeating itself, the more the letters felt different. R for Riley. E for Elliot. Not a file, a designation. Someone had tracked them long enough to assign them numbers inside a system, and those numbers appeared on the envelopes used to summon them. And the dead man on the floor had been the one to place the envelope in her hand, and the note near his body said the file was open, which meant something had changed. Something had been exposed or activated or… Her phone buzzed inside her pocket. She pulled it out. Tara. Still no update? Are you okay? It's been almost an hour. Elliot was watching her. My friend, Riley said quietly. Tara. She was with me when the envelope arrived. She knows I was coming here. You told her? I told her I was going and to expect updates. I didn't tell her not to worry because she'd have ignored that and I didn't want her showing up. She looked at the message. She's not going to stop until she hears from me. Elliot said nothing. Not permission and not refusal. He simply held the information, the way he seemed to hold most things, without rushing toward a response. Riley typed, I'm okay. Police are coming. Don't come here. I'll explain later. She hesitated, then added, Don't talk to anyone about tonight. She sent it and put the phone back in her pocket. Tara's reply came in under 30 seconds. What happened? Riley, what happened? She silenced the phone. She's going to be frightened, Riley said. Better frightened at home than involved. He said it without apology, and she found she agreed, which was an uncomfortable thing to notice about herself. The sirens reached them before the lights did, a faint, distant wail that grew in the way city sounds grew, absorbed and diffracted by buildings before it arrived with any real directness. Then, faintly, the sweep of blue through the gap under the service door at the far end of the corridor, the hum of an engine cutting out. Riley straightened. Her coat, her hands, her breathing. She ran a quick internal inventory. She was composed. She was capable of appearing more composed than she felt, which was a professional skill she had developed over years of briefing people with more institutional power than she had, and she needed it now. Elliot moved to the center of the doorway and stood with his arms slightly away from his body, hands visible. "Let me start the conversation," Riley said. A beat. "Fine." Voices in the corridor. Norwegian, clipped, the particular register of people trained to move quickly into uncertain spaces. Boots on concrete. Two officers came around the bend in the hall at a half jog, flashlights swinging, and stopped when the beams hit them. "Stands, Hendine Opper, hands up, both." Riley raised her hands to shoulder height. Beside her, Elliot did the same, the motion fluid and practiced in a way that had nothing to do with criminal compliance and everything to do with someone who had been in situations requiring deliberate non-aggression. "My name is Riley Hunt," she said. "I called 112 approximately 10 minutes ago. The man is inside this room. We haven't moved or touched anything since I made the call." The officers came forward. Two more followed from the corridor. One moved past them into the break room, crouching almost immediately beside the body. The other kept them in the beam of his flashlight and began asking questions with the mechanical speed of someone running a protocol. Names, identification, relationship to the deceased, how they entered the building. Riley answered each question once, clearly, and waited. The officer took their phones. She surrendered hers without comment. Elliot did the same. The envelopes came next, requested when Riley mentioned the letters, and she produced hers from her coat pocket and watched an officer slide it into an evidence bag without reading it yet. The break room smelled of coffee grounds and damp concrete, and something underneath both that she chose not to identify. The detective arrived 14 minutes later. By then, Riley and Elliot had been moved from the doorway of the break room to a position further along the corridor, near a metal utility shelf that held cleaning materials and a clipboard of maintenance schedules. The officers had stopped asking questions and started making calls, and the basement had acquired the particular density of a space that was being converted from ordinary to investigative. The detective was a man in his mid-40s named Anders, who introduced himself simply as Detective Anders, with no elaboration about rank or unit. He wore a grey overcoat over plain clothes, and he had the compact, unhurried manner of someone who had attended a significant number of scenes in his career and had long ago stopped letting initial circumstances determine his attitude. He looked at Elliot first, then Riley. He did not look at them the way the uniformed officers had, assessing for immediate threat, for intoxication, for flight risk. He looked at them in a slower way, the way someone looked when they were filing information and had already decided the information was going to matter later. "I understand you found the deceased," he said. "Yes," Riley said. "We arrived separately, encountered each other in the basement, and then found the man when we checked further into the service area. I called 112 immediately." "At what time did you enter the building?" "I entered at approximately 21:29. Mr. Harper entered shortly after." Anders glanced at Elliot. "That correct?" "Yes," Elliot said. "You came in through the rear service entrance." "Using a code," Riley said. "The code was in the letter. I've given the letter to your colleagues." Anders reached for the evidence bag an officer produced and looked at the envelope without removing the letter. He turned it over, looked at the blank front. No postage, no sender address. "It was hand-delivered," Riley said. "A man came into a cafe in Grünerløkka this morning. He gave it directly to me and left. He didn't speak." Anders set the bag down and looked at her steadily. "Can you describe him?" "Grey-haired, late 60s, possibly older, medium build, medium height, dark coat. He walked in, found my table, handed me the envelope, and was gone in under a minute." The detective's expression did not shift in any readable direction. And you've never seen this man before? No. Mr. Harper, your letter was delivered to a construction site in Bjorvika. Correct. Elliot had been leaning against the utility shelf with his arms crossed, not in hostility, but in the posture of a man conserving himself, measuring what the room needed. Similar delivery. A man came onto the site, bypassed the site supervisor, and handed it to me directly. Can you describe him? Dark coat, medium height, not young. I didn't get a clear look at his face because the light was poor and I was focused on the envelope. Anders let a pause expand between them, and the answer, which Riley recognized as a technique, silence as pressure. She had used it herself. You didn't know each other prior to tonight, he said. No, Riley said. You received identical letters with the same meeting time, the same location, and the same access code from what may have been the same individual, and you both came here independently. Yes. Another pause. Why did you come? The letter specifically instructed you not to contact the police. Because the letter stated that a matter concerning my safety required immediate attention, Riley said, which is a statement that is difficult to ignore, and because whoever sent it clearly knew my daily routine. Choosing not to go felt less safe than going. You weren't concerned it was a trap? I considered the possibility. I decided the circumstances made reporting ourselves more protective than staying away. She kept her tone even, which is why I called as soon as we found him. Elliot had been watching one of the uniformed officers, not obviously, but with the particular peripheral attention of someone calibrating the room without appearing to do so. Something had shifted when the note on the table was mentioned, when the officer relaying information to Anders referenced File 17, reading from his own notepad, and another officer near the door adjusted his weight slightly. The adjustment was small, a shift of the shoulders, a brief redirect of attention that returned to neutral too quickly. Elliot had seen the motion and logged it and said nothing. Anders looked at the evidence bag again. The letters are signed with the initials HR. Yes, Riley said. Do you know what those initials refer to? I don't. True. She knew what Brasovo might mean, and she knew what HR had begun to suggest in the hours since she'd first read the letter. But those were hypotheses built on incomplete information, and she was not going to hand a detective an incomplete hypothesis that pointed toward a conspiracy involving a dead Romanov bloodline and a secret organization in a museum basement on a Wednesday night. Anders turned to Elliot. Mr. Harper, same question. No. The detective put the evidence bag down on the shelf beside him and looked at them both for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. We'll need formal statements from you both, he said. Tonight, at the station. You'll come separately. There'll be a short wait, and then we'll go through it in full. Riley nodded. Of course. In the meantime, is there anything else you found in this room or noticed on your way into the building that you haven't mentioned? The question was delivered without emphasis. It was the kind of question that was asked at the end of an initial contact, specifically to catch what people had been managing during the earlier questions. The typed note near the body, Riley said. We saw it. We didn't touch it. I couldn't read it fully from where I was standing. This was partially true. She had read it clearly. She had simply not read it to him. The handwritten note on the table, Elliot said. Same. Visible. Unread. The detective looked at each of them in turn. All right, he said. We'll get into the details at the station. He moved away toward the break room, and the weight of the conversation lifted fractionally. Riley exhaled through her teeth. Elliot uncrossed his arms. The officer by the door, she said, quietly enough that only he could hear. I saw it. When File 17 was mentioned. Yes. She kept her eyes forward, on the wall. Could be nothing. Could be, Elliot said, with the tone of a man who considered that outcome possible, but secondary. The story continues in the next chapter, so make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with fellow book lovers.